Savages. Let's do a little business here. Welcome to the show, first off, but let's do a little business. Let's talk about Cerberus. Cerberus Strength. Hey, Ken is at Cerberus. He is making some of the most awesome shit around. He wants to get in with you Highland Games people. He is a Highland Games athlete. He's also a strongman competitor. He is huge into the sport. Where are you getting your knee sleeves and elbow sleeves from? Mark Bell out in California? How many fucking cabers has that guy turned? None. Zero. Zip. Cerberus. They know what you are dealing with. Go check them out at cerberus-strength.us. They have wraps, straps, knee sleeves, elbow sleeves, smelling salts, tacky. Anything you need for your strength journey, Cerberus Strength has it, and you need to give these guys a holler. Cerberus-strength.us. Use the code REFINEDSAVAGE10 at checkout. Go buy some gear. VikingCoffeeCo.com. Are you still buying store-bought coffee? You shouldn't be, because it's garbage. I've never found a good store-bought coffee. Viking Coffee has spoiled me for that stuff. Check them out. Evan Armstrong is brewing the best coffee around. I'm looking forward to seeing him this weekend at the Highlander. VikingCoffeeCo.com for the best tasting coffee around. Use the code VikingCoffee10 at checkout. Are you using CBD oil yet? I keep telling you about CBD oil. I need to know that you're in the game with me, guys. I'm telling you, if you have joint pain, if you have muscle aches, if you have problems sleeping, if you have a friggin' crazy dog who gets anxiety every time there's a thunderstorm, Warrior CBD is the place to go. Do not, especially if you live in one of these bullshit states like I live in that have still outlawed marijuana, have all these stupid fucking rules on marijuana and CBD oil and all that shit. Just go right to warriorcbdofficial.com. Shipping straight out of Colorado, Mecca. They're going to get you that CBD oil, real CBD oil, not the nonsense you buy here that doesn't have any THC in it. warriorcbdofficial.com. Use the code WARRIOR20 off at checkout. Serious Steel. Chad Clark hooked me up with these guys. I could not be happier with Serious Steel. I love these guys. They are sponsoring our Highlander this year. Great guys, great company, great products. If you are outfitting anything from a home gym all the way up to a giant college recreation center, these are the guys to go to. They have all the products you need. Why go to a company who's only fixated on the CrossFit Games? Screw those guys. Go to SeriousSteel.com. Use the code SAVAGE at checkout for 10% off. Stay Classy Meats. We've talked about Stay Classy Meats so much on the show. And it's because I love it. Look, I am spoiled on the meat. When I got my first box, I was thinking, oh, that's nice. I got a free box of meat. That's not what had happened, though. Once you get that open, you start grilling this meat, you realize there is a huge difference in the way the meat tastes. It tastes that way because of the way these animals are raised. Grass-fed, fresh mountain streams, no hormones, small batch farming. They know how to raise these animals humanely and make them live long, happy lives before they're processed. And I tell you what, it makes a difference when you eat it because I feel better, get all pumped up. I just feel like I could take on the world after I eat a bison ribeye from Stay Classy Meats. I'm telling you, you don't have to go and get the huge box right off the bat. Start with the little box. See if you like it. Get addicted like I did, and then move on. When you look at pricing in comparison to buying that much meat in a store, they're still cheaper. You might as well buy it from a good, solid company. They're going to ship it right to your house. I mean, you can't ask for more than that. Give them a holler. You will not be sorry. Finally today, Iron and Stone Strength. These guys are living the lifestyle. They are lifters of iron and stone, and they are up in that Buffalo area. They're putting on competitions. They're running their own gym, and they are making the best gear around by people in the sport. Strongman athletes, powerlifters, Highland Games athletes, bodybuilders. They've got it all up there, and these guys are dedicated. Buy some gear from them. Support the people who support the show. These guys are doing it right, and they are supporting us. So, hey, let's support them, guys. Head on over to ironandstonestrength.com and use the code REFINEDSAVAGE at checkout for 20% off. Today on the show, I want you to stick with me. Don't run off. I got to tell you about this guy I interviewed. His name's Ross Hamilton. Ross is an older gentleman. Ross is an expert on the Serpent Mound in Ohio, down here in Southern Ohio. He has some ideas that will either make him a genius someday or a madman, but that's how genius works. We sat down for about an hour in his backyard next to his koi pond, and we discussed everything from the gods and the titans all the way up to how he was the one who found the constellation representation in the Great Serpent Mound. This guy has an amazing story to tell. I think you're going to like it. Stay with me, guys. I think you're going to dig these ones. Not everything is about how much weight you lift, right? Check him out. Ross Hamilton, motherfuckers. See ya at the end. All right, we are in Cincinnati, Ohio with Ross Hamilton. How you doing? And welcome to the show.
Excuse me. I'm just having a little sip of grape juice here. Mark, it's good to see you. I've been waiting for you to come down for a good week now, and I appreciate your giving me the heads ups.
Yeah,
because oftentimes I forget.
Make sure I gave you a couple reminders, but
Yeah.
I was first given your name by Mark Eddy and Jason Jarrell, and I was telling you I'd sent you an invite to come on the podcast, and then I was reading Graham Hancock's new book, and he mentioned you pretty extensively in the book, that he had come down here and you guys had spent some time at Serpent Mound together, and it was just a nice coincidence that I had already sent you a message to get on the podcast. Have you been inundated with people wanting to talk to you ever since the book came out?
Well, yes and no. I found a pretty dramatic increase in people wanting to befriend me on Facebook. But I've only had a couple of people that wanted to get closer, and they came last Saturday. One of them drove hundreds of miles. But I think that the nature of the individual who is at the time getting the attention kind of feeds back into the way that that person is approached, and something of them becomes a part of the attitude and the technique for befriending that individual. So because I am by nature very shy and retiring, I only like to talk to friendly audiences, and because I am by nature a mystic, I find that people don't approach me in the way they usually approach people they consider to be a teacher. I never claimed to be a teacher. The only thing I really have a claim to is being a man, because I was initiated by a master of spiritual science back in 1969, which was, I guess, 15 years ago. And he often said that we adopt. He was a saint, a master saint in India, and he said we adapt after we're born into this world to what our predecessors, our parents, and the like have laid out for us. And some of us acquire riches, some of us acquire good education, but then the realities are that when we're first born, we're confronted with a different world from where we're coming from. A lot of people don't give much thought to where we come from before we incarnate, but that's a basic premise of my philosophy, is that we're much older than the bodies we inhabit. And we have to make our way in this world and sort of carve out, in some cases according to our own karmic background, a situation for ourselves that we can deal with being in a strange world, a strange environment. And the older the culture that we're born into, the more it seems like the reality that we have to adopt. But there's always that nagging little pull in your heart of hearts that wants to know who you are. What am I? Because we all have experiences that sort of indicate that we're not the body. These things happen to us, especially when we experience incredible pain and sorrow and suffering, or spontaneous love. The kind of intoxications that come with the realization that that love is a true thing. It's a reality that seems to be food for the soul. And so when you get a little bit of that, you sort of are boosted in the understanding that you're not the body, that you're something far more subtle and sublime. And going from that kind of wisdom, if you will, I started studying spiritual science at the behest of my master when I was a young man, just in my 20s. And I began to apply the things that I had learned from the teachings of the masters and the saints from the very ancient times to understanding my mission, if you will, which was to get a handle on the actual prehistory of the North American continent, of the Americas in general. If you ever want to just jump in, go ahead.
No, I'm listening. What I know of you is your work with the Great Serpent Mound. And a lot of people, I think, especially from outside of Ohio, don't know what it is, have never been there. I think a lot of us as children spent time, our parents took us down there, but there's a mound culture in this area and in the states surrounding it. But the Serpent Mound is different than the other mounds around Ohio, where they're more, burial, but and correct me if I'm wrong, the Serpent Mound seems to be more of an effigy type mound, a symbol of some kind.
That's a good word. It's only been after studying the serpent and its related sites that I've come to the conclusion that it's really an emblem. I mean, I started out throwing the word effigy around until I got a pretty good idea of what it meant. And then I began to move in the direction of why. And you go to the archaeologists first, and the people that own the property have, a sort of permanent archaeologists on staff, or a small group of them, and anthropologists. But they have to answer to their job description, and so you don't get much more than, it's an effigy, and it's the largest serpent effigy in the world, etc., etc. And you don't really learn much from that if you're looking for the mysteries of the soul that the people that designed and created it had. Everybody's a soul. So I'm sure they had much more deeper purpose than it being an indicator, for example, of the seasons. One of the things that was discovered very late, actually, in the history, the white man's history of Serpent Mound, is a true north line. That wasn't found until 1987 by Bill Romaine, who's now an old friend of mine. And he hypothesized that that line was put deliberately there in order for other bits of knowledge to become or to be made available. And being conservative by nature, he began to put out there that with this north line, we can get a true east and true west direction. He couldn't before he found that line because there's a massive magnetic anomaly at the site, which nobody really knows what it is. It could be electrical because there's fault lines through there. And the same thing happens when a fault line is created as when you break a refrigerator magnet, you can't put it back together because it repolarized itself. You have to flip it over for it to come together in a similar way to the way it was. So when fault lines are created, you get a sort of magnetic anomaly, which can affect compasses. At the same time, there could be a big chunk of iron down there from a massive implosion of a comet that occurred probably 300 million years ago, give or take. So the discovery of the North Line allowed Bill and some other guys who sort of capitalized on his discovery, who happened to be sort of on the student payroll of the people that own the earthwork, the OHC, Ohio History Connection, formerly the Ohio Historical Society. And so those students, after Romaine had hypothesized some lunar alignments, they hypothesized some solar alignments. And the way the coils are laid out, you have the correct number of degrees so that you could indeed, taking the Serpent to be at sea level, which is argumentative, actually see the winter solstice sunrise, both equinoxes in the central coil jutting out to the east. You'd have to have a map to see what I'm talking about. And then the summer solstice sunrise in the northernmost coil jutting out to the east. And then you have your setting points that come in from the west on the ingress coils. So there's actually 3 loops to the Serpent and 7 coils. And boy, is that a magical number. So you get a lot of kind of metaphysical oriented people who love that number 7 and so likened it to the 7 nerve ganglia of the sacred human form and some animal forms as well. And so I began to contact people who were enlightened to the possibilities when I worked there years ago that the Serpent was more than a calendar. Now, when Bill Romaine discovered that North Line, he kind of tied it in with the North Star, which is now that star that's at the end of the handle of the Little Dipper. But just by almost serendipitous good luck, about 25 years ago, my older brother, Bill, had given me a book on astronomy because I was kind of curious to sort of try out some constellations, maybe Native American, maybe traditional European and Eastern, with the Serpent, and some of the other earthworks. And I didn't get very far because my understanding of astronomy was limited. So I put myself to the task. And after a while, one very long session, I got tired, and I kind of threw a transparency of Bill Romaine's map of the Serpent onto an open astronomy book where the constellation Draco was featured. And I went back the next morning, and it seemed to have fallen on a pattern. Now, any scientist will tell you it's not admissible in a court of evidence, when you have some sort of coincidence like that you build on. But you have to be honest with people. You have to tell the truth about how you make discoveries. So when I published the first book, my publisher, who was an avid student of archaeoastronomy, thought that this was really interesting because the pattern that I was able to recover from the coincidental dropping of the transparency was fine-tuned. I bought a number of books, read up on Draconis. Pretty soon I became sort of an amateur expert on Draconis. And then I started consulting with the Cincinnati Astronomical Society, went downtown to the Museum Center and consulted with their chief astronomer. And after about a year, we kind of came to the conclusion that if the Romaine map of Serpent Mound was accurate, then it appears as though this large asterism of Draconis was accurate. Now, the Draconis that we look at today is bigger than the Draconis that was celebrated 5,000 years ago when the last pole star was in place. Like I said, the present pole star is Polaris, and we haven't had really a bona fide pole star that doesn't move as the Earth rotates at all. It just stays stationary for 5,000 years. And that pole star happened to be the lead star in Draconis. So this map was intriguing, not only because I had acquired the knowledge in a sort of mystical way, as though there was some angel looking over my shoulder.
Putting the transparency down right in the right spot.
Helping me, a tired old guy. But also because there was a, well, let me put it this way. The Serpent is laid out on a piece of land that, I don't know if you've been there or not, Mark.
When I was a child, but I've been looking at pictures as well.
But it juts out. It's a huge piece of limestone. It's about 600 feet long, and it was apparently carved to fit the Serpent. Now, archaeologists say, well, it couldn't have been carved because it was too big a job. But now, because of all we found out about the alignments of the Serpent and other attributes of it, apparently somebody did kind of terrify the outcropping to be a throne, to serve as a throne for the Serpent. And so when the Serpent was created, it was found that right at the point where the seventh coil from the tail begins to meet with the head area, right beneath that seventh loop is the geographical center of the Serpent. So it's exactly, I think, 340 feet from that point. I want to open that book for a second and show you.
Sure, yeah.
Here we go. It's 340 feet from that point, beneath the coil, beneath the seventh coil, to the tail of the Serpent and to the opposite end, and to the head of the Serpent. There's the seventh coil. And let me see if I get this right. You can edit this, right?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's the geographic center, right there. And it's equidistant between these two
Oh,
points.
I understand, yeah.
Now, here's the stars for the constellation Draconis. And they fall exactly on the margins of the Serpent.
So what he's showing is the book, the image of the Serpent on the ground with the constellation Draconis over top of it, and the stars line up exactly on the body of the Serpent, all the way around, and even in through the coils.
As though somebody had drawn the Serpent using the stars.
Right.
Because there's no other stars in Draco that would go in the green part of the Serpent.
They don't. There's nothing else outside or inside that would.
So it's almost like, who could have done that?
Right.
You know? And then one star didn't fit in, and I said, in spite of the coincidences, because of how tough these guys are, these archaeoastronomers and archaeologists, they're not going to accept it because they're going to say, well, look, boss, that one star doesn't fit in. So even though it's really interesting, your theory doesn't work. So my background at buying all the books paid off, because that star was the pole star.
Is in the exact middle of the Serpent as well. That's amazing.
That's the current pole star right there on the circle that comes out from that star.
And it's fairly easy with today's technology to look back on what the sky looked like 5,000 years ago. Now, that constellation isn't it isn't just important to the people here. It was important to other cultures around the world as well, right?
Yeah. Part of the research dealt with the fact that Draco was seen as a giant serpent, or some sort of a dragon, even an alligator, a crocodile, by ancient cultures, but it was always some sort of reptilian thing that was celebrated, and it runs right between the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper. So even though the stars of Draco were relatively faint compared to the Big and Little Dippers, Ursa and Major and Minor, it still had a a major impact on the ancient cultures because Draconis Alpha was what all the other stars appeared to rotate around.
Right.
And that stayed that way for hundreds of years, coming and going, until finally it went out of phase. And that's when Apollo, the sun god, the Greek sun god, noticing that the serpent was going out of phase, decided to preserve its sweetness and its knowledge by slaying it and chopping its body up into 24 distinct parts and preserving it under his oracle, the Oracle of Delphi.
Oracle of Delphi, right.
So that sort of indicates that the serpent was celebrated as the later known as the Python of Pythagoras. And Pythagoras was instrumental in rediscovering exactly what Apollo was doing, because when it was in the sky in its heyday and all the ancient cultures of the world were reverencing it, it was not just the pole star, but it was the Logos. It was that part of the sky that everybody was putting so much attention to that they felt they were invoking the presence of the Great Spirit. And so they considered the image of the Python, or whatever you wanted to call that great serpent, to be in the image of the Great Spirit, the instrument by which all things were created, the thing that in its mouth is reminiscent or talks to us of the Egyptian belief that the serpent Nehebkah gave birth to the souls, regurgitated them from its body, which was composed of all the lights of the stars and the sun.
So a different way of looking at it, where we're, as we were taught when we were kids, that the serpent was eating the egg. This is just a different thought pattern behind it.
Right.
He's actually spewing it forth.
Right, because it's the instrument of the invisible. So it became a holy thing, and the Logos is also known as the Word. And it was on the knowledge of the reverberatory principle of all creation, which we now embody in string theory and physics, that Apollo chopped it up into enough parts that he could cover all the consonants and vowels of speech. And so he created a language, an initiate alphabet, if you will, that was used for his Olympian magic in the very ancient days. And subsequently got lost and became embedded in Phoenician, Hebraic, and probably 3 or 4 other budding languages. And then Pythagoras, around 500 BC, got up, 400 to 500 BC, got up and said, I'm going to gather that together. So on his travels, he was able to bring together a lot of the existing letters of what we now think of the Greek alphabet that they were already using in Greece and the islands of Crete and so forth. And he brought home a number of others that he felt were once a part of that original Apollonian severance. And he added on to the existing alphabet, and although he isn't given credit for it, by putting all this together, was able to show pretty convincingly, I think, especially in view of the way the serpent was seen 5,000 years ago, that what we now call the Greek alphabet was actually once the serpent mound, or the image that the serpent mound represents. And that's why in the back of my first book, I show plate by plate how the 24 letters of the Greek alphabet were actually surgically diced away from the image. So I can show how if you put all the letters of the Greek alphabet together, you have the image of the serpent.
Right. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that it was fascinating to me in Graham's book, where he talked about how these different cultures all had the same or very similar stories, and a lot of them were based around the constellations and what they were seeing in the night sky. And I don't know how well, it's accepted by mainstream academics, but there's so much evidence now that these incredible structures, whether they're the mounds or the pyramids, were built in correlation to what was going on in the sky at night. So what was the phrase? So is below, so is above, so below. Is that how he put it?
Exactly. Yeah.
When you were just Graham was just here talking with you. What was that experience like? And were you able? It sounds like he was able to get a lot of new information from you about this mountain. Did he have preconceived notions coming in that you were able to change, or was he?
Well, that's an interesting story. I don't know if I should tell it. I'll tell the story, but I'll leave it up to you. You can just delete it if you want. But Graham was announcing his new book, Magicians of the Gods, on the internet. We had some mutual friends, but I'd never met him. And the reputation that I had was solid, although I was really a minor author, especially compared to him and Bavall and that bunch.
Sure, yeah.
So, just as fate would have, he announced that book, and then he said, and following the release of that book, Santha, his wife, a lovely woman, and I are going to come to the Americas, and he's already been here, of course, many times, but he's going to start researching a book about America and try to uncover more information that would take civilization here back. We now know that he was able to uncover an extra 120,000 years.
Yeah.
So I was really a little shocked because I knew Hancock, although he does great research and he's a wonderful writer, he would take the Serpent Mound and he would read what he could find on it, and I think he would possibly misrepresent my work. So I wrote down on the Facebook announcement, even though he had thousands of people reading it, I knew he'd read it. I said, Graham, I wanted to thank you for the free book that you sent over to me through mutual friends, but I'm a little wary of your doing any work on the Serpent Mound because it's my life's work. And,
sure, right.
And, well, turns out he had not only a conscience, but a soul. So he made it his business to get in touch with me personally. And we spent a lot of time together having discussions. And by the time he left, I was put at ease that not only would he not misrepresent me, but he might very well be able to help me out.
Yeah.
Which he did. Now, he wasn't able to get into the depths of the research, but he was able to cover all the primary stuff that he had a facility with and apply it to this in such a way where it was like he had constructed a pathway for me to have a broader audience,
right,
that I could begin to eliminate further teachings.
Well, and the audience is growing and evolving, and you see more and more people. I think when Fingerprints of the Gods came out, in the 90s, you didn't have so many people believing that the Earth was much older, or the mankind and civilization was older than we think it is now. But with these books, like this book, and your research on the Serpent Mound, it's appearing more and more likely that civilization, and when I say advanced civilization, I think people get the wrong idea, but a more advanced civilization.
There's two kinds of advanced civilizations. There's the kind that science fiction writers like to talk about.
Right.
And then there's the time is not linear but cyclical civilizations that return to us and constantly improve incrementally every time things come back.
Right.
And that's the kind of civilization that's real.
When you look at it, and people who argue that point, or against that point, it doesn't take much to look at the Middle Ages versus ancient Rome and how much more advanced ancient Rome was in military tactics and in construction and things like that.
Architecture, yeah.
Yeah, and then you had this drop in all that knowledge for hundreds of years, following that. So it's not
the church did that. They were very good at doing away with literacy. Very good at it. And they took great pains even until the time of the age of conquering by the Spaniards. Even by 1500 to 1550, they were still in charge of eliminating literacy. And so when they came to Mexico, the first thing they did after they conquered the place using gunpowder was they burned all the books. And I think we have 4 left.
Right.
4 or 5. Just terrible. So civilization is not reflected in the post-Roman era. But we do go through these troughs in history where we seem to advance to a certain point and then we seem to fall back. And it's only since more and more people of the artistic bend have been observing how the Fibonacci series works, and that is you take 2 steps back and then 3 forward. Mm-hmm. Then you drop back 2. So you add 1 and 2 together, you get 3. You add 3 and 2 together, you get 5. And that is a way of really describing proper evolution of something. And so when the church took over, something called the Dark Ages happened. In a sort of enslavement of the people to a formidable sorcery and kind of witchcraft that was in place at the Vatican in order to keep people attentive to giving up their treasure and their love to, and they believed it themselves,
sure,
of course, to this monster that was devouring souls and creating an entity of everlasting devolution and torment. And so it wasn't until Martin Luther came along that we were able to catch a breath and really formally protest this.
He was very
machinery.
dangerous to the Catholic Church, Martin Luther.
I mean, they eliminated everybody else through murder.
Yeah.
Everybody knows the story of the Catholics.
Yeah.
And the Knights Templar and so forth. But anyway, I'll get back to the Serpent Mound because everything we just talked about sort of applies to the serpent as well. When we conquered the United States, the white European race, I say we, even though I may be a white guy, but I certainly don't want to have to take the responsibility.
You don't want to be lumped in with them.
Right. For the things we did to the Native people. And that's why I'm pro-Native and I work on behalf of for the betterment of Native people. But that's one of the reasons. The Serpent Mound was looked at as a pagan symbol. That's the influence of the church, right? Mm-hmm. And it was belittled as something akin to that which had taken the Garden of Eden away from us. And that continued for some time until archaeology wanted to rid itself of religious influence, and this terrible date of, I think, 3000 BC or 6,000 years ago that seemed to be lingering over the appearance of man on the earth. They wanted to get rid of that, and so there was a lot of turmoil in American archaeology, but they managed to separate us soon after church and state were separated. Now, that sounds like a step forward, and in many ways it was, but with the racial prejudice in place, both blacks and Native people were still subject to the torments of this ludicrous religiosity that was still permeating the consciousness of the rich people.
Sure.
So when we began to look at the Serpent Mound again in a different way than the way it had been looked at, I think really a lot of it got kicked off because of the north-south line. And then after that, we were able to put together the astronomies, and then, you know, the horizon astronomies, which is all the readings you get for sun and moon are taken from the horizon, whether east or west. But all of the readings you get from stars are indigenous, and they form another aspect of astronomy that I call astroarchaeology. So archaeoastronomy gave us the sun and moon alignments with the Serpent, but astroarchaeology gave us Draco, which in a way was far more potent because we didn't need to have carbon to back up the dates of when the Serpent was made by using Aveni's tables. He's an archaeoastronomer, Anthony Aveni, to determine if the Adena and Hopewell were here at the same time that the sun would have risen.
Right.
So you have to consult an archaeologist to get the carbon for the astronomer to hypothesize that, yeah, these two things worked out. And it didn't take long, I'm going to digress for a second here, before these astronomers began to see that the archaeologists are going to start using them to determine dates they otherwise wouldn't be able to determine on their own because they're archaeologists,
Sure.
They're not astronomers. So the smart astronomers developed a new science that they were the bosses of,
Right.
called archaeoastronomy. Very smart. And these guys took over any form of archaeology that had to do with horizontal alignments. Now, these guys didn't want to go into the heavens because that was indigenous, and as far as they could see, it was pretty much impossible to figure out exactly what an article was representing the reflection of, if not something on the horizon. So when I came up with Draco, even though it was spot on dated to 5,000 years ago through the pole star and dated exquisitely, not dated, but made synonymous with the constellation Draco because of the exquisite way Draco fit to it, nonetheless it was difficult for not just the archaeologists, but the archaeoastronomers to fathom that somebody could have made a discovery
Right.
like that, right? So you see how I sort of gained an almost occult leadership,
Right.
and that was like a gift. Now, return back from that little digression, and this is not a development of my ego, you have to trust me on that.
I believe you.
Because after the Draco, I got really sick, and I developed encephalitis from some sort of toxic compound that was in the environment, and I'm not sure how I acquired it, but I almost died from it. But because I was initiated by a master saint, he interceded and noticed that I had a lot more time necessary to finish my work, and so I got over what actually was lead poisoning.
Wow.
And lead poisoning can affect a child because it affects the growth of the brain, but if you're already an adult, it only affects your nerves.
Okay.
And so the body tended to send the lead out to the extremities. And so to this day, I have trouble closing my hands, and I have trouble walking without watching everywhere I'm going.
Sure.
Because I can trip over just a little raise up the
Right.
sidewalk and land on my face, you know. But apart from that, everything else, in fact, my brain seemed better than ever.
Right.
And so we went back to work at Serpent Mound, my spouse and I, Leslie, who passed away about 4 years ago, just about on this day. And we started meeting people again and getting back into the swing of things. And then late one autumn evening, when we were sort of packing it in for that year's activities, and the museum was going to start changing its hours, I had a revelation that the serpent was at the center of a field of lodges of holy temples, which are outlined in Squire and Davis' 1848 tome, which I can give you a copy of too if you want to see it, that all rotated around the serpent. In other words, if Serpent Mound was at the center of the night sky, was it also, as you say, reflected from above, below? And were all of these temple mounds, the octagon at Newark, you know, and the High Bank complex, there's probably 70 of them that were all made in geometric forms, and they weren't burial mounds. But they apparently were resuscitated because they were created when the serpent was, about 5,000 years ago. About 2,500 years, they were all falling into ruin. And so the Adena people stood up and they said, let's rehab them because we're going to lose them and we'll only have the stories.
So the basic taught in your high school history is that the Adena were the creator. But now we're looking at, through your work, that this is actually something that was created many, many years before that, and maybe the Adena or the Hopewell refurbished them, recreated.
That's exactly right. They took on a massive project because of the stories that had come down to them from 2,500 years before. Their ancestors were gods, and they had a wonderful spiritual technology that enabled them to draw down the energy of the clouds and commingle it with the magnetic energy of the earth and produce medicine.
Yeah.
And they were able to create these beautiful gardens, and they were in the shape of what they call manitous. So within the confines of these Manitou figures, they created these great plantations, and they weren't just experimenting with geometries. They were highly skilled. They understood the geometric principles of the Greeks that were given by Pythagoras, Euclid, Hipparchus, and a couple of others at the same time that the Adena were refurbishing. These guys in Greece were reestablishing the same principles that the Adena were fixing up.
Yeah.
Now the Adena didn't understand the math. They were just refurbishing the creations that the guys that did understand the math knew.
So there was some kind of ancient knowledge that was lost many, many years before the Adena even arrived.
Again, we have that losing,
right?
That period of darkness comes in. Right?
Now, does that coincide with Graham's theory that we had a common impact somewhere in between there that would have caused the people who had the knowledge to maybe get dwindled down to near nothing and maybe cohabitate with some of these hunter-gatherer tribes?
Yeah, it does. And I think that's why Graham is so interesting, because he's covering not only faux pas created by the over-exaltation of empires, but he's also bringing into the equation possibility of massive cometary impacts that can, again, kind of send us back into the dark ages.
Reset everything,
right? But they happen. Both kinds seem to happen.
And we just talked yesterday with Dr. Nigel Brush at University of Ashland, who talked a little bit about this and how close we are always to one of these comet strikes happening, and that this is not a new phenomenon, and it'll happen again, and it's just a matter of time, and the complete and utter destruction when it does hit, especially anything close. You could see how you would lose this knowledge, because the majority of the people who had it would be gone.
Right.
So what do you envision as the people who actually created this mound? What are we looking at as far as a people?
The design of the mound? Yeah, the original designers. They created a Manitou that could process, like I said, the energy of the sky with the energy of the earth through the use of the culturing of the earth energy in the meteor crater, which is where a lot of energy is, using a spire of some sort, perhaps precious stones and so forth, and finding a typical place where the lightning struck frequently, and then just creating a monument that would intentionally begin to milk the clouds, sort of preemptively milk the clouds of their energy,
Sure.
and eliminated the lightning strikes permanently. And I interestingly discovered a poem that was given to us by a woman who was an anthropologist at the Smithsonian earlier in the last century, which are some of the Dakota people, that said there was a time on the earth that our ancestors speak of. This gets back to the period of the gods, when the lightning didn't strike and the thunder didn't clap. But this was the period where the giants came to the earth and dug the ditches where the rivers ran. And then, after they had completed their work, they returned to their heavenly identities as thunderbirds. So, and there was a warning, so that when they left, they no longer could mollify the deadly lightning strikes and produce the medicine for us. But you had to look out that it didn't. And this gets back to the age of the Manitous. These people at Serpent Mound created, I think, the primary example of a scientific instrument that allowed them to store just a tremendous amount of positive electrical energy. You have to understand, just between positive and negative charge, they're attracted to each other, but the positive charge is gotten by a magnetic field running through semiconductor and less than semiconducting material, like water, for example. You run water through a magnetic field, it produces a charge, but it's loaded with magnetic flux and only a few electrons that hold that flux together. And that flux runs through the earth in rivulets, and it was coaxed and used by the ancient engineers to certain places, like the Serpent, to fill up the body of the Manitou or the temple so that it would attract lightning. And sometimes they did it so well that, like I said, it would preemptively milk, literally, drain the clouds of their electrons. So you would see, like in the Bible, it talks in Revelation 13:13, that they knew how to draw the fire down from the sky and use it for their own purposes. And of course, the church changed it so it sounded like it was a satanic thing. But that gets back to the Mithraic mysteries of Perseus, where somewhere in old Persia, they had a temple set up where they were able to create this medicine, which in ancient India is called Amrit, which is what gives us the ability to live for hundreds of years and develop our intellect so that we're not just peace-loving, but benign enough to bring peace and to ensure it, and develop to the point where we have no need for violence of any kind. So that was the purpose of the Great Serpent. It was to serve as the centerpiece to a grand astronomical field which spread out over literally hundreds and hundreds of square miles all around the Serpent Mound. And each one of those was a relay station that developed the mana, the Amrit, the medicine, to a certain point that would allow the serpent to exponentially increase its outpouring.
Right.
So this kind of spiritual technology was also supposed to have happened during the age of the gods in Egypt, when their pyramid technology was properly developed. And in England, you have the Glastonbury Tor, surrounded by 60 square miles of flatland, which was at one time developed to be the 12 segments of the astrological night sky, and the tour at Glastonbury would attract the energy from the sky, and it would be distributed to all of these houses of the royal families. And then they would feed it back to the tour, and it created this wonderful interchange between earth and sky that literally made them all divine.
Yeah.
And another dimension to the earth opens up. And our Native American myths are loaded with stories about how we once had access to the good lands, the happy hunting grounds, but the Great Spirit drew a veil over them to punish us for bad conduct. And that veil was drawn over all of us about 6,000 years ago. We had access through various temple systems in Greece, even in Australia, throughout Oceania, Europe.
And there's evidence
Asia.
of this still everywhere.
There's evidence, but it's crumbling, and the scientific instrument that once was sprawled across the entire planet is in a state of such poor repair right now that guys like Graham and others are standing up and saying, look at what's happening to the earth right now. We are losing our magnetic field. I'll take a little break.
Sure,
Let
absolutely.
me get my voice back, and then I'll try to elucidate on what your friend... American culture believed in Father Sky and Mother Earth. The Greeks believed in Uranus, Father Sky, and Gaia, Mother Earth. All over the world, these wonderful cultures believed that the sky and the earth were somehow two parts to an equation that endowed the people with their divine right, birthright to spirituality. The earth has a magnetic field. We're all aware of that. But the ancients didn't see it as a magnetic field. They saw it as her spirit, her aura. And they understood that, as we do today, that the earth was always passing through her own spiritual field as an armature would pass through a field of magnets. And as we know, when an armature passes through a field of magnets, and the armature is made of copper, then you're going to produce a lot of energy in the copper, in the earth. So they learned to do that, and they learned to channel that energy. And in the beginning, they set up a system of relays all across the world, all across the globe, that would immediately take the energy that was being generated by the earth and focus it into their temples. The Titans were the first that we remember that had a system of 12 gods, 6 gods and 6 goddesses. But their religion was really a science religion that allowed Gaia to always release herself. And so Uranus and Gaia propagated and produced many offspring. And it was a wonderful golden age. And then, for some reason we can only speculate on, that system gradually fell apart. And the earth returned back to a natural state, and the magnetic field was no longer a vibrant aura protecting us perfectly from the rays of the sun, but just barely from the rays of the sun. And then Zeus stood up and he said, look, I know what Kronos did when he lopped off the genitals of Uranus. He restored a system that made everybody divine, made everybody a god with cosmic consciousness. So he developed the Olympian system. And it also had 6 gods. And he restored that, and that worked for quite a long time. And that system fell apart. So what we're doing now is we're going to these places that were restored briefly about 6,000 years ago to remind us of our birthright. And we have to understand that it's been so long since the original Titan system was in place that the Olympian system didn't really restore it back completely. And what's happened is the Earth has taken that energy and kept it within. We were warned by the Greeks that Uranus was not allowing the Titans to come out from Gaia, meaning the energies of Gaia, was suppressing them, was keeping Kronos and his brothers and sisters in the Earth. And this was causing her great pain and suffering. And those are earthquakes and volcanoes. So what happened is, in the beginning, Gaia was free. There were no earthquakes or volcanoes. The Earth was at peace. It was spinning around the sun gratefully and gladly. And then all of a sudden, the Earth is not sending its energy to the surface to be sort of applied, like we use appliances, to the betterment of taking the energy from the sky and turning it into medicine. That didn't happen anymore. Only when the lightning struck, then things grew better, and the rain broke up the nitrites in the air, and they dissolved in the rainwater. So we saw the principle working, but the medicine was sucked up by the plants so quickly that we forgot how to process it for our own use. And so this is what happened. And this should scare everybody that hears this. I would prefer it if you were scared to death. But we're on the verge of losing our planet entirely, not because of plastic, not because of raising temperatures, but because we've not allowed the magnetic field to breathe. We are supposed to be the stewards, and what's happened is the energy got trapped in the rocks of the crust and of the mantle of the Earth, and it couldn't get up to the surface because we no longer had these temples in its place. And so what happened? Turns from electricity into heat. Anybody who has an electric blanket knows you can convert energy into heat really quickly. And that's why the rocks expanded, cracked, formed the tectonic system, right? Which is ancient. So you can see how long ago the Titans lived before the tectonic system. And then the tectonic plates rub up against each other because they're still expanding because of the heat produced by the magnetic field. Okay, get the connections?
Sure.
Our science doesn't see that
yet.
And so volcanism was born. And so you get terrible volcanic eruptions, which could kill us all. You're worried about cometary impacts. I worry about volcanoes.
Yeah.
We can destroy comets if we have rocket technology, and if we allow the medicine to be made, we can figure stuff out real quick. But we have to get back to basics. Let's make that medicine. Let's restore the Serpent, and let's restore Glastonbury. Let's put the capstones back in the pyramids. Let's start making that medicine. Put our best guys to the test. Screw the stuff the government is experimenting with, the HARP. These are just intermediary stages. They don't understand that we have to harness the magnetic field, because when you have a magnet that's being generated electronically, let's say you have a bicycle wheel with magnets around where the rubber is, and you create a copper belt around it that's not touching the magnets. If you try to rotate that bicycle wheel, it won't go anywhere because the magnets will fill the copper with energy and feed it back onto the magnets.
Right.
And that's exactly what we're doing right now, because the energy from the Earth can't escape to be consummated by the sky, which also is produced by the magnetic field, by the way. Gaia's son was Uranus, and she took him as her husband later to propagate with. So the Greeks knew what they were doing, mythologically. So we have to understand perfectly that that energy being produced by Gaia is feeding back on that core where, the scientists say there's a big ball of hard iron surrounded by a liquid nickel, and the rotation of the Earth creates a magnetic field. Well, that magnetic field is producing lots of energy, but if that energy isn't leaked out to produce, work of some sort, then it'll feed back on the magnetic core, and it'll tend to flip over that little ball of iron.
Yeah.
It'll flip it. And right now, if you look at the North Pole, it used to be steady, but now it's skipping all over the place. It's way over in Russia, and one day, very soon, it's going to just skip over Russia and go right down to the South Pole.
Yeah.
Or worse, it's going to get stuck at the equators, and then we'll all die.
Yeah.
Because the magnetic field at the equator won't be strong enough for thousands of years to protect us from the sun. We're dead.
Yeah.
So there is a solution. There's a good solution. Stick another drop. About 800,000 years ago, the Pleistocene began. Okay, now this is really interesting, and you'll see how a solution is possible if you just take the time to listen to old Ross very carefully. Okay, there was a pole flip 800,000 years ago, and when the magnetic field flipped, it was probably because of something that we're experiencing right now. The Earth was feeding back her own energy, and it caused the magnetic pole to flip to give the generation a break, the generation of heat a break. So as the Earth began to cool off and the earthquakes began to slow down a little bit, the magnetic field at the north was humming like a top. It wasn't moving around. It was just like. And a million years ago, 800,000 million years ago, when the Pleistocene started, when that magnetic field at the north and south was just humming like that, the weather patterns, which are definitely affected by the magnetic field, began to really stabilize. And as a result of that amazing stabilization, anytime it snowed in the Arctic region or even below the Arctic region, the snow would remain. And so the levels of the oceans would desalinate, and it would snow in the north, and that snow would stay, and pretty soon the oceans began to drop. The ocean levels began to drop. Now, about this same time, and this is what I learned because I was initiated by a perfect master of spiritual science who knows the entire history of the earth like the back of his hand. At that time, a group of scientists that I like to call the Olympians, they could have been the Titans, but a group of very knowledgeable men and women were sent to that place in the north where the magnetic field was stationary, and they created Hyperborea, which is a beautiful temple, and they enclosed the magnetic vortex of the earth inside the temple. And inside, it was pretty big. It's probably a city block, maybe a little smaller. And inside the temple, they had a massive bowl with rotating water or mercury or some sort of solvent that could melt gold. And they ensured that the magnetic field, the aurora borealis, would come in through the capstone of the pyramid they eventually built over the temple. And it came down into their bowl of conductive material, and as the magnetic field grew in energy, as Gaia recovered after the pole flip, Hyperborea was able to keep the magnetic field humming like a top. And as a result of that, the Pleistocene just continued. But it got to a dangerous level. And so probably about 40,000, maybe 50 or 60,000 years ago, they dismantled Hyperborea. And they did everything in their power to ensure that the magnetic field would continue, but they allowed for the processes of nature to commence that would eventually melt all the ice, because they had to. Now we have to restabilize it. And that's all I'm going to talk about today.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I want to thank you for having us down. This has been really interesting and really enlightening. Will you be at the summer solstice next year at Serpent Mound? So if people want to go down and hear you talk, head down to Serpent Mound at the summer solstice, which I plan on doing because I think it's going to be a fantastic time down there. And like I said, thank you for having us on the show, and it's been a pleasure meeting you.
My pleasure.
This has been the Refined Savage.